Thank you all for coming to reading number 4 of the Blue Raven series. I'm Bruce Willard, my wife Jody, sitting behind the desk there. We welcome you. Tonight, I want to mention around the gallery, upstairs on the second floor, there's Suzanne Theodora White's fabulous composed photography. Really worth a look at some point if you get a chance. Also, Joan Hanley's work is being featured in this month's show. So take a look at those. Jody also asked me to mention that there will be a film screening and book signing with author John Bird about his book, Rockland, Maine, Rise and Renewal, sort of a history of the city of Rockland. Should be a really interesting event. That's coming up a week from tonight on the 25th. It's at 5 p.m. Anybody's interested, please join us. Joan Hanley's, this is an author's talk or artist talk, right, Jody? Yeah. That's scheduled, this one's the 21st. So coming up this Saturday, that's at 5:30. And she'll be doing that here. So hope to see you at one of those two. Tonight's our last reading of the summer, but we're already working on next year's lineup. I've been in touch with Kwame Dawes and Afa Michael Weaver and Garrett Hongo, whose remarkable new poem on emptiness was just in an issue of New Yorker. I'm also looking at adding a number of other poets and some local, more regional poets too to the mix. So stay tuned. Whatever we do will be on the website and also announced by email. So we'll keep you well informed. After Major's reading tonight, as with our other readings, we'll be doing a Q&A session. And then after the Q&A, there'll be a small reception for poets to sign their books and a little gathering right here at the desk to my right. Over the last several readings, I've spoken of my love for lyric poetry and my admiration for how the best contemporary American lyric poets sing something essential and human that celebrates what it's like to be human. Our readers tonight do this and more. They expose the lyric self as a bridge to something universal, monumental, evolutionary. As it is as if the beauty or truth they work to conjugate becomes transitional, an invitation to some communal wisdom. In his chapbook, The Light Under the Doorstep, Robert Hedden says in Field Notes, "Poetry is too generous, its capabilities too great, liberating, for it to be reduced to a simple tool of self-expression. When a poem loses touch with the outside world and becomes so cloistered, it is meaningful only to a small coterie of people. It loses its vitality, range, and finally its mission." Major Jackson has given his life to the creation, sharing, teaching, and exploration of how poems work. What makes them resonant? His essays, lectures, and introductions name the grind of elements that make their music endure. In his memorable collection of essays, A Beat Beyond, Major brings many of the ideas on contemporary lyric poem together under one cover. But I want to excerpt just a few quotations as they go towards the inspiration behind this first season at Blue Raven Gallery and our final reading tonight. On his aspiration that contemporary poetry be not decorative, precious, or elite, but engaged with the world, he makes an argument for, in his words, the verbal dexterity, a passionate intelligence, a nutritional wit, all from a single imagination that sees beyond reality. And then he goes on to say in his 2019 introduction to the best American poetry, Our art should do more than celebrate ourselves in Whitmanian fashion, or sublimely frame our individualism, or camouflage our moral shortcomings and desperate self-regard. Even our most personal poems should break through our sense of ourselves and stabilize the mutual fate of our shared destinies. On the fellowship experience of reading, also in the 2019 Introduction to the Best American Poetry, he says, "Poems have reacquainted me with the spectacular spirit of the human and that which is fundamentally elusive to algorithms, artificial intelligence, behavioral science, and genetic research. And from my lyrical self, and a beat beyond, in a remarkable essay about how a poem's style is music born of constraint, or what Jackson calls the pressurized moment, I am less interested in uttering something profound or lasting, but merely want to announce my freedom, presence, and ephemerality." Our first reader tonight is Albert Abonado, author of the poetry collection Jaw, which came out in 2020, and the just-released Field Guide for Accidents, which was selected by Mahogany Brown for the National Poetry Series. I'm delighted that Albert is giving his first reading from the book tonight. It's actually not due to be published until next month, so we're lucky to get some early copies and hear a very early version of his readings. An MFA graduate of Bennington College, he's received fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and in receiving an NEA fellowship, Albert said, "I hope to conjure and transform, to reimagine an act that demands immersion, concentration, and attention. All my writing begins and ends the same way. Who is this person speaking, and how did they get here? The solitary nature of writing makes it easy to forget we are not alone, that our efforts have purpose. We might spend long stretches of time surrounded by silence. This support is life-affirming, a reminder that the arts still fulfill a vital role in our culture, that there is still space for the imagination, for empathy and wonder." Albert's writing has appeared in Bennington Review, Colorado Review, Poetry Northwest, Zone 3, and other places. He lives and teaches in Rochester, New York. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you for that, Bruce. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Jody, for this beautiful space. There's nothing more mortifying than hearing yourself quoted back to you and not remembering what you said. When he started quoting that, I was like, oh no, what did I say? But I appreciate that. It's a really beautiful introduction. I'm going to start off with a poem from my first book, and I'm going to transition right into poems from the new book. I'm really excited too, because this is the first time I've actually seen hard copies of the book. So this is Luxury. Today I do not think about death, not the brittle skulls of children or the metal in their blood that passes for bullets. I do not think about the bones of birds or the blackberry seeds left in the belly, the time a muscle takes to go blue from a deflated lung. Not the bright jaws of insects that come for the flesh, the meat. I do not think of grief as a color on my aunt's tongue, her face a country of fires. I do not think about kissing my grandfather in his coffin, not the temperature of his lips. Today, I lose count, forget about sorrow and its teeth, regret and its prickled skin, how to pray for the dead I do not have to bury, that hymns turn my mouth into a sun, that terror can be the same word for skin or brain. Forget I do not speak Chinese or have to correct anyone who asks if I speak Chinese. Say, no, I'm afraid I am Filipino. Say, I do not speak Tagalog either. I do not ask anyone to forgive me for forgetting, and this is the oldest joy. Let me forget that I cannot hold the moon to feed it peppers when I want, that the rain in the trees is not a rapture, an applause for the rose on my shoes, that I do not blister and crack from holiness. Today, I am holy. And when I split my lip on the fist of my brother, that was holy too. And when I kneel in the center of an empty parking lot, I do so grateful I can taste my blood. From the trees full of birdsong comes unripe fruit, after Rick Barrett. How I start a prayer with the same hand I use to lift food to my mouth. I draw a line down to my navel, pulling a zipper or curtain string to reveal the small wolf in my belly, the one I feed fat and vinegar. This is also how I pray. At 11, I leapt off the roof of my house. It was autumn, and everything that surrounded me collapsed back into the dirt. I wanted to practice my falling, feel the earth bend beneath my arrival, convinced I would not break. When my mother prays in her garden after the surgery on her arm and neck, I listen to her bones grind beneath her skin. She plants tulips, brushes a root from her hair, slices for dinner that evening the garlic and onions she will saute in a wok with ground beef. And this too is a prayer. My father rolling up his sleeve to reveal the long scar on his arm to a room full of strangers at the garage where they kept the wreckage of his car. A prayer about the flesh around a knuckle and the alloys the body will not reject. By prayer, I mean I read the same poem over and over until my hair becomes sloppy with poem, that I eat it slowly until it coats my mouth. All my prayers begin with hunger, a prayer in the shape of cold fried chicken at my uncle's wake, in the blood stew I fail to replicate. My wife wants to know why I reduce my poems to something that fits in my mouth. I don't tell her I buried my relatives in my throat, that my prayers belong to other voices. When I pray, I can't hear my acid reflux gurgle, but the trees full of birdsong, the tires hiss as they pass over a wet road. This is a prayer full of rain and fog, weather soaked through my old shoes, the thin fabric that contains the storm beneath my feet. If by prayer, we also mean the stories that we did not know came before us, then this is also a prayer. My father stepping away while they lowered his father into the ground as we tossed white flowers onto his coffin. The hour in which my brothers and I turned to one another and asked, "Where did he go? What is he doing now?" So in the Philippines, in the Philippine community, there is a tradition. If you are in the presence of an elder or like a higher religious figure, a priest, or even a bishop, you are to receive a blessing from them. And that blessing is in the form of a gesture where you take the back of their hand and you press it against your forehead. So there was this one time, this family friend brought her son to a gathering, and she encouraged him to get a blessing from me. And I was like, I'm not old enough to do this. This is not a responsibility I am ready to have. I don't feel that I have earned the title of elder in the community yet. So this poem is about that. This is Mano. To the young boy who raises my wrist to his forehead, I apologize for the blessing I cannot provide. Forgive me for what my hands forgot. Scales on the piano, phone numbers of old homes, the honeybee crawling through my fingers before it stung me. I do not carry around my years, but shed them like a husk. Your hands may also betray you one day, linger on a surface waiting for a memory to flood your muscles. The hours are a syrup you poured into your skin, the sweetness behind your snap. I once lifted my grandfather's wrist like this to my forehead after a stroke stripped him of his English, after he whistled into the evening while he plucked the hairs from his chin. If I perform a gesture enough times, it becomes a holy reflex. I pressed his heat and weight into mine until the air thickened to a silt between our palms. Once, he held up to my face a bird he trapped. Once, I held a bird for too long, it stopped singing. So Major is actually one of my teachers from Bennington. So it's a real honor and a pleasure to be able to read with him. But as a teacher too, I often think of how there should always be an asterisk to any bit of advice that we receive from our teachers. No, this is not something you said. But I remember hearing from a teacher, you should never use the word blood in your poetry. It's just one of those words you use a lot. But it is a word that crops up a lot in my writing. And so next poem is kind of in response to that. This is advice for using blood in a poem. If someone suggests you use words besides blood in your poems, make it part of a recipe. Try dinuguan, which is a stew in the Philippines. Try dinuguan, for example. Make your blood impossible to avoid. Another name for this dish is chocolate meat, the name your aunts used to hide from you the fact you were eating pork blood with your rice. Other ingredients may include garlic, onions, liver, pork belly, dried bay leaf, vinegar, chicken stock. I always get hungry reading this. Say you know the difference between blood and sweetness. Say you hate the taste of liver. Think of the blood in your poem as a lie. Say this is also your blood. The Spanish explorer Miguel Lopez de Legazpi and the Datu Sikatuna, who poured blood from their left arms into the same cup, mixed it with wine before drinking. Make a sculpture for the promises you have made with blood that belonged to someone else. Put it on an island you have never visited and encourage others to see it. Dream about a volcano and an earthquake, about the gunfire the day they carried your grandfather to the cemetery after he cracked his skull on the bathroom floor, about the hair of your parents, sticky with blood, the glass beneath their skin, the scabs on their lips. When you came to retrieve their luggage, their sandy fishing gear, from the wreckage of their car, you found the bloodstains on the exposed airbags, the dashboard, the jacket wet with rainwater wedged between the seats. Consider the insects that gathered around all the blood you would not touch. Count the number of times this blood appears. When you close your eyes, what is the color of your blood? No cheating. This is Outer Banks. I have a poem that starts like this. My mother came back as a haunted boat. I spend most of the poem trying to decide if I should escape the boat, if I should forgive my mother, or if I'm the one who needs to be forgiven. The poem ends when the boat sinks, becomes a new reef. It ends when I visit my haunted boat mother to catalog the eels and crabs, the mollusks under the hull. I even swim with the sharks and feed them shrimp. I put this poem away, call my mother on her birthday. I don't tell her about the haunted boat in my poem or the slow flood that overwhelmed her. I don't tell her where the boat sank. It needed to be someplace I could still reach, where I could practice holding my breath, where the light could penetrate glass underwater. Anyway, it is her birthday, and she tells me I should donate her body to science when she dies, whisked away to a room where science can do what science does with the dead, until they reduce her to ash, which is the economical thing to do. All she wants, she says, is a light dinner, maybe a few prayers said in her memory. We could talk about her recipes. but I have more questions, like, what about a resurrection? And how does a poem come to this? All right, I just have a couple more poems. I think the only thing you really need to know about this next poem, I make a reference early on to something called a carabao. It's a water buffalo in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines specifically. This is on the history of the line. On this line, a herd of carabao. On this line, a moon ascends over a volcano. On this line, a flag declares, "Welcome to the empire." All my best lines are stolen from an empire. On this line, a fleet visited and burned the towns closest to the water. On this line, the smell of hair on fire. This was just the beginning of negotiations. On this line, soldiers uncover a pine box among ruins. They open the pine box and welcome the small boy inside. On this line, we give the boy a name, Santo Niño. On this line, we give the boy a basilica. On this line, we dip the boy into the river. On this line, the boy lives in a corner of our house. On this line, my brothers and I complain about his thin smile. On this line, we ask the boy to blink for us. On this line, we ask him to forgive us. On this line, the boy visits us before we sleep. On this line, we pray for the unburnt. On this line, we pray for the unexploded devices. The line breaks when my brothers fall asleep, curled on the floor like rosaries. The line breaks whenever I eat dairy against my better judgment. The line breaks when I fart in public. The line breaks where a mouse with its head caught in a trap refused to die and rattled all morning behind a stove. The line breaks when I collapsed the head of the mouse with a broom. The line broke when my mother asked me to moisten her dry lips in the hospital, and I did not know how. It broke when the hospital asked for insurance information, and I could not provide it. It broke when my mother asked me to shave my father's face, and I did not want to cut his skin. It broke when my mother refused my hand because she did not need it to cross the ice. It broke when my father fell asleep in the seat next to me as I drove home, his jaw shiny and slack. The line breaks if I do not update my Facebook status. The line breaks whenever a picture I post on Instagram only receives 3 likes, which I also delete right away. I'm very embarrassed about that. The line breaks when whiteness says, "I forget you are even Asian sometimes." The line breaks when whiteness says, "You are not the kind of Asian who just hangs out with other Asians." The line breaks when whiteness says, "I did charity work in the Philippines. I probably know more about being Filipino than you do." The line breaks because I got the shits swallowing whiteness. All my lines end in doubt, and leave enough space at the end for prayer. Forgive the line that stains the fingertips. Forgive the line that does not admit what it stole from its parents. Forgive the line that does not clear its browser history. Forgive the line that dissolves before the sentence ends. Forgive the line that fell asleep while FaceTiming. When it does this, I love to watch it breathe. This is such a lovely audience. Thank you for listening. This is my last poem, and I'm so excited to hear Major's work. A pile of poems is called a negation. One poem on top of another poem stacked on top of that, like the terrible architecture of a hamburger or an ugly sub, until they obscure the clouds, until they disrupt the migration of birds. I call out to the poems at the very top and ask them what they see. The poems tell me an ocean on the rise. They tell me circus elephants, the bald spot on my head, as if my scalp is a fleshy hole into which my hair disappears. The poems on the top want to come down. The poems on the bottom want to climb up. No, you can't, I say. You live in a delicate ecosystem. The poems become noisy and sweaty. They gossip and swear on the dead, a hive I stare into for too long that makes me dizzy. I start to think I am a cloud, so I walk away. I get lost, walking through a neighborhood I have never seen. One house still has its Halloween decorations up. A bright orange skeleton hangs by the door, patiently waiting for the leaves to turn gold. I invite the skeleton to become a poem. You have so much potential, I promise. I've made similar promises before, but this time I do not lie. I am serious. We could be good together. We don't have to be better than this, but we could be. Thanks.
Thank you, Albert. Fabulous poems. That was outstanding. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the book. Buy it. There's so much I could say about my good friend Major Jackson. He's the author of 6 books of poetry, including Razzle Dazzle, New and Selected Poems, The Absurd Man, Roll Deep, Holding Company, Hoops, and he won the Cave Canem Poetry Prize in 2002 for his first book, Leaving Saturn. I think it was your first book. Yeah. He edited volumes including The Best American Poetry in 2019, The Ranga for Obama, and the Library of America's County Cullen collected poems. And as I mentioned in my earlier intro, he's also the author of A Beat Beyond, the selected prose of Major Jackson, which collects a number of his essays, the introduction to Best American Poetry, and some other prose work. I've been a steadfast fan of Major's work for more than a decade, and I'm amazed by the scope, the range, and the beauty of his poems. I'm also amazed by the multitudes they embrace, the impossibly linked and unexpected images that move his emotional voyages. His playful humor, the way form is something so malleable to him, the love that surprises his line, and the address that demands all of me as a reader. When he writes, "Reader, I should have married you sooner. This time let me not sleep like a prophet who believes he's seen infinity. Let me run at breakneck speed towards sceneries of doubt. I'm ready to go. I'll take this trip anywhere he invites me." A recipient of fellowships from the Academy of American Poets, Fine Art Workshop Center in Provincetown, the John S. Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment of the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, Major Jackson has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, a Whiting Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts. He's published poems and essays in the American Poetry Review, the New Yorker, Orion Magazine, Paris Review, Plowshares Poetry, Poetry London, and World Literature Today. He lives in Nashville, Tennessee, where he is the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. And he's elected member of the Academy of American Arts and Sciences and serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. Welcome, good friend.
Good evening. Hi, good evening. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jody and Bruce. Always a great pleasure and affirmation to be in your presence, and particularly in this space. It's just gorgeous. And thank you for coming out. I have this utter belief that art making, literature does not exist without the circle being completed with you here. So, And Albert, I'm so proud of you, man. Wow. It was a great, whimsical, smart, heart, soulful poems. And it's great to see you grow into the art and your craft. I want to start off with a poem called Ode to Everything. And if you have been paying attention to poetry for the past several centuries, you know that to write an ode comes with, as part of your job description, like writing a sonnet. So I could not settle on anything. Our friend Neruda wrote odes to socks and cats, and I couldn't settle on one thing, so I decided to write Ode to Everything. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that one of our jobs is to kind of sound the note of joy in our poems, and odes serve that function. Ode to Everything. Somehow, I have never thought to thank the ice cream cone for building a paradise in my mouth. And can you believe I have never thought to thank the purple trout lily for demonstrating its 6-petal dive, or the yellow circle in a traffic light for illustrating patience? My bad. In my life, I have failed to praise the postman, whose loyalty is epic, the laundress who treasures my skinny jeans and other garments, and the auto repairman who clings a wrench inside my car, tightening her own music. Were my name called and I were summoned on a brightly lit stage to accept a little statuette, after staring in utter disbelief, I would thank my dentist, as well as my neighbor who sits vigil beside the dying, far away from the lights, and my 4th grade teacher who brought down 3 tape rulers on my hands as punishment for daydreaming out a window during the exam I already completed. Mea culpa. Now that I know the value of the peaks across from Flanders Hill, I will forever express reverence for their green crowns. I will never fail again to say small devotions for the scar on a friend's face that lengthens when I walk into a room. Back when teachers were allowed to punish you physically. I have another poem. This is from the new section of the poem. These are new and selected. And I begin with this poem, Let Me Begin Again, mainly because after writing so many books, not that my belief in the art wavered at all, but it was wonderful to be in language again in such a kind of vibrant, new way. The idea that this book that I was putting together might allow me to venture forth into other areas that I had not previously written about, but also for me to return to the practice of writing with a renewed vigor. Let me begin again. Let me begin again as a quiet thought in the shape of a shell, slowly examined by a brown child on a beach at dawn, straining to see her future. Let me begin this time knowing the drumming in my dreams is me inheriting the earth, is morning lighting up the rivers. Let me burn my vanities, old music in the pines, snifters of scotch, a day moon like a signature of night. This time, let me circle the island of my fears only once, and then live like a raging waterfall and grow a magnificent mustache. Let me not ever be the bird cage or the serrated blade or the empty season. Dear glacier, dear sea of stars, dear leopards disintegrating at the outer limits of our greed, soon we will encounter you only in motivational tweets. Reader, I should have married you sooner. This time, let me not sleep like the prophet who believes he's seen infinity. Let me run at breakneck speeds towards sceneries of doubt. I have no more dress rehearsals to attend. Look closer. I am licking my lips. It must be the supermarket in me. Anyone here from Florida or lived in Florida? Okay, you lived in Florida. They have a cult going on down there, and it's called Publix. And this poem began because my wife, when we were recording, she would come up to Vermont and walk into a supermarket called Price Chopper and turn up her nose. And then when I went down to Florida, everything that she said about Publix was true. White owls, great lighting, fresh fruit. It's like walking into a museum. And that spawned this poem. It must be the supermarket in me. It must be the supermarket in me, all lit from inside, full of wide aisles and thoughtful shelf stocking, where you'll find my feelings and memories. That's why on the outside I look so ordered and put together. My inner supermarket contains an old world butcher shop with no trace of the slaughter. Shoppers arrive with an unfathomable hunger, which I relieve by offering freshness, quality, and value. Some are penniless and can only fantasize, licking their lips at rows of artisanal cheese and meats behind glass display cases, the cloth-bound cheddars and goat, at ropes of cured salami and prosciutto. Still, they taste. I offer free samples at stations throughout my supermarket so people will come to know and like me. In the produce department, many test my pears and avocados for ripeness. In the floral area, they sniff. Some walk off with my bouquets. I contain cheerful baggers who will walk you to your car. At times, truthfully, I dislike this about myself, forever accommodating. I've not always had a supermarket in me. It began when the church in me lost its congregation and when I lost my mother's love to cocktails and other stimulants. There is no place for anger in my supermarket. I keep it in the back room with a sign that reads, "No trespassing, employees only." It's a way of being in the world, a self full of checkout lines and refrigerators until someone runs through you, knocking down pyramids of canned goods or panic shopping, leaving empty aisles. I live in Nashville after 18 years in Vermont. Transition was totally fine. Don't worry about me. It was great. One of my great encounters was not just the music, but there's these things called cranes, and they're doing a lot of building. And there's these bachelorettes who ride on the back of trucks, and they celebrate an impending nuptial. And I've met more songwriters than I know of poets. And I know a lot of poets. Nashville Sonnet, deconstructed on a bed of magnolia blossoms. In this city, No one talks dialectical materialism. From high up, the cranes speak an invincible language. The trusses extend over pedal taverns and tractors, joyriding flatbeds of dancing tourists. And it is like reading God's lips. On guard, she says. Today, I am landscaping, staking light across my wintergreen yard to get the worm's perspective, to beg his forgiveness. I am reaching fingers into darkest soil, pondering the afterlife. A house wren flouts its surefire code to all this achy, breaky singing. Such intricate phrasing, like a compass behind Giacomo de Latini's feathered quill pen. I live in a city of acoustic martyrs addicted to heartbreak. Plus this, even the magnolias, vulnerable each spring, court a delicious despair and gift their cream-colored blossoms like spark plugs for the living. I had a lot of fun writing that poem. You should know that. So the pleasure of writing or putting together a new and selected poem is rediscovering poems I haven't read in a while. And here's one of them. It's called Indian Song, and it takes its title after a Wayne Shorter composition. I used to be able to tell you the album, but it's a wonderful song that I would listen to, one of several songs that I listened to just before starting to write. I wrote this poem in graduate school some years ago, and there's several references. Like a lot of my poems, there are references to objects that no longer exist, and you'll hear one of them. And if you don't recognize it, ask someone 35 years or older, and they could tell you what this object is. Indian Song, after Wayne Shorter. Freddie Hubbard's playing the cassette deck. 40 miles outside haze. And I've looked at this Kansas sunset for 3 hours now, bristling as big rigs bounce and grumble along I-70. At this speed, cornfields come in splotches, murky yellows and greens abutting the road's shoulder, the flat wealth of the nation whirring by. It's a kind of ornamentation I've gotten used to, as in a dream, espaliered against the skies blazing, cloud luffs cascade lace-like, darkening whole fields. 30,000 feet above, someone is buttering a muffin. Someone stares at a sky phone, and momentarily a baby cries in pressurized air. Through double-paned squares, someone squints, fields cross-hatched by asphalt strips. It is said Cézanne looked at a landscape so long he felt as if his eyes were bleeding. No matter that, I'm heading west. It's all so redolent. This wailing music, by my side, you fingering fields of light, sunflowers over earth, miles traveled, a patchwork of goodbyes. Another poem that has survived the cut, it's called Why I Write Poetry. And I'm going to dedicate this to Jody and Bruce. Why I write poetry. Because my son is as old as the stars. Because I have no blessings. Because I sit alone and welcome morning across the unshaped jaws of my lawn. Because the houses on my street sleep like turtles. because the proper weight of beauty was her eyes last night beneath my eyes, because the red goblet from which I drank made even water a Faustian toast, because radishes should be banned, little pellets that they are, because someone says it's late and begins to rise from a chair, because a single drop of rain is hope for the thirsty, because life is ordinary unless you plan and set in motion a war, because I have not thanked enough, because my lips moisten whenever I hear Mingus's goodbye pork pie hat, because I plant winter vegetables in July, because I could say the morning died like candle wax and no one would question its truth, because I relish being sent into the coat room in third grade, where alone I would turn off the lights and run my hands over my classmates' coats as if playing tag with their bodies. Because once I shoplifted a pair of Hawaiian shorts and was caught at the Gallery Mall. Because soup reminds me of the warmth of my grandmother and old aunts. Because the long coast of my dreams is filled with saxophones and poems. Because somewhere someone is buying a Rolex or a Piaget. Because I wish I could speak 3 different languages, but have to settle for the language of business and commerce. Because I used to wear paisley shirts and herringbone sports jackets. Because I better get it in my soul. Because my grandfather loved clean syntax, cologne, Stacey Adams shoes, Irish tweed caps, and women, but not necessarily in that order. Because I think the elderly are sexy and the young are naive and brutish. Because a vision of trees only comes to wise women and men who can fix old watches. Because I write with a pen whose supply of ink comes from the sea. Because I still do not eat corporate French fries or rhubarb jam. Because punctuation is my jury and the moon is my judge. Because my best friend in 4th grade chased city buses from corner to corner. His father could not stop looking up at the sky after his return from the war. Because parataxis is just another way of making ends meet. Because I have been on a steady diet of words since the age of 3. So I try to read a poem from each one of the books. Irrationally, I think they're children, and if you don't cart them out at least once, the muse may not be kind to you next time. This is from a book called Absurd Man, and the title of it is You Reader, and you don't need to know much, and if you're in a fog in this poem, it's okay. Just know the thesis of the poem is what I said earlier. Without you, reader, the poem does not exist. And I figure you, reader, as a lighthouse, bringing your intelligence to illumine the poem's meaning. You, reader. And this is an interesting poem. I'm sorry. I'm going to say, there's a moose in this poem. And I was a big fan of Elizabeth Bishop. And I always thought that when I moved to New England, northern New England, I would see a moose. It took 15 years for me to see a moose. And you can hear some of my frustration in this poem. You, reader. So often I dream of the secrets of satellites. And so often I want the moose to step from the shadows and reveal his transgressions. And so often I come to her body as though she were Lookout Mountain. but give me a farmer's market to park my martyred mass, and I will name all the dirt roads that dead end at the Cubist sculpture called My Infinity. For I no longer light bonfires in the city of adulterers, and no longer smudge the cheeks of debutantes hurriedly floating across the high fruit of night. And yes, I know there is only one notable death in any small town, and that is the pig farmer. But listen, at all times, the proud rivers mourn my absence, especially when, like a full moon, you, reader, hidden behind a spray of night blooming, drift in and out of scattered clouds, above lighthouses, producing their artificial calm, just to sweep a chalk of light over distant waters. All right, I'm coming to the end. There's a poem about chess that I want to share with you. Actually, I'll read this short poem because I haven't read one from this book. It's called Leave It All Up to Me. And if you hear the echo, it's Prince. But this poem is so short that it was able to make the New York train subway line. This was in part of one of their poetry in the subway. Leave it all up to me. All we want is to succumb to a single kiss that will contain us like a marathon with no finish line. And if so, that we land like newspapers before sunrise, halcyon mornings like blue martinis. I am learning the steps to a foreign song. Her mind was torpedo and her body was storm, a kind of wow. All we want is a metropolis of Sundays, an empire of hand-holding and park benches. She says, leave it all up to me. This is called Stand in That Vein. This is called Lovesick. And I was very happy that it appeared in the Sierra magazine this year. My wife is also a poet, and Valentine's Day in our house is different from yours. Can't show up with a Hallmark card. Got to come with a new poem. Lovesick. First, you will need to cross some dark threshold. I suggest lying on your back in a pasture of cut ryegrass or in a city park. I suggest planting an arm behind your head. You have inherited acres of a night sky, and she is your aurora borealis. And though you cannot see the world's wild shadows, here she will be, nacreous, grace wavering in bands of blue-green light, ribbons of gold neon swimming beneath skin. You will want to write a long letter to your dead. You will encounter her mind as a kind of iridescent song, heroic and dense. You will feel fetched as though from some polluted river. Her glances will pass over you like folklore. Do not be afraid. This is wonder mirroring itself and breaking across your face. Endless treetops and silhouettes, knowing looks of your elders. Say that again. I said it's okay to ooh. Why is it okay Thank you. That's very kind. That's very, very kind. Any sound or emotional reaction for a poet it takes us back to our deaths. It's so affirming. So thank you for that. I'm still trying to find that poem about, I'll end with these two poems. And one of them is a political poem. And this is the last poem in the book, but it's not the last poem of the night. That's the next poem. This is the last poem in the book. And I'm taking the concept of we contain multitudes and giving voice to one of the majors that exists inside the majors. And this major speaks about the major in front of you. And this major who's speaking is not so happy that they don't get credit for writing the poems. So this is a dramatic monologue in the voice of Major, who's not the major in front of you. Good to see you. Double Major. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings and ordered athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry, and thus I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls our thirst for pads and pencils destiny. Our voices come together like two wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability. The test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed. To bed. I'm going to make that one my last poem. Thank you.
Thank you, Major. That was great. Thank you very much. Wonderful to hear you read. We're going to do a quick Q&A. I have a question I'd love to maybe launch things off with, and I'll pose to Major, and Albert, you can weigh in here too. But Major, music, particularly jazz, blues, R&B, has always been an inspiration and grounding for a lot of your poems. I think the title of your first book, Leaving Saturn, comes from Sun Ra Orchestra and your love of that. Can you maybe talk for a moment about how music fits and how it influences and drives your poems?
Sure. Does the cameraman want me to come to the mic?
Is that better? Yeah, please.
For me, the arts are I'm one of those folks in which I've been shaped by the art that I've encountered, visual arts, and definitely music. I had in my household a full range of musical styles that I was exposed to, from gospel to folk music to classical to blues and jazz. And I had the great fortune of inheriting my grandfather's passion for the last two. And it was just a great way for us to connect. And then when he passed on, of course, I'm honoring him in that way. But when I started writing and even looking at art, I can hear the rhythm of the stroke of the painter's arm. The language in a sentence carries a certain pacing and rhythm. I'm trying to kind of create that sense of embodiment. And the music has, in a way, trained my ear to kind of compose with some sort of measure. I'm not a trained musician. We had a piano in our house. My grandmother was an amateur pianist, and attempted to have me hear perfect pitch. The closest I got to it was in high school, singing in the all boys choir. But bringing that sensitivity to my work, and also thinking about the lives of the musicians and their approach to making art, which is so improvisatory, so like being in the moment, that I try to remember that as I'm going about writing poems. It's so important for that energy of the poem unfolding to be transferred over to you as readers and listeners. Yeah.
Anything?
Yeah.
Actually, I just want to play off of what Major said about the improvisatory nature of music. So I grew up, when I was growing up, my parents tried to impose piano lessons on me. And it was a thing that I resisted a lot, but I found the most joy just kind of noodling around on the piano and kind of figuring out and discovering, oh, what fun sounds can happen when you just sort of like smash the keys together. And that sort of activity, that practice sort of carries over into the poem, into sort of like the discovery of language and the discovery of the poem just by kind of noodling around with words and seeing what happens.
I love that. Yeah.
Alan?
Maybe following up on music, I read a poem of yours, Making Things, where you say, I want to be all razzle-dazzle before the dark cloaked one arrives for a last game of chess. So I'm really taken with the title, Razzle-Dazzle, and would like to hear from you about that.
That was going to be the last poem, funny enough. So thank you. Because it does have the title of the book in the poem itself. The reference, there's an important reference to Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, where Death is playing a chess game with one of the main characters. And we know it's inevitable. And art making I'm wishing the art that I make serve as some sort of testament of my existence. And although I'm not a theater person, and in fact, I was surprised. I love that song, by the way. I wish I could sing. I would sing it, give them the old razzle dazzle. But I like the idea that we leave works as artists that serve as a testament of our selfhood and existence. And in that particular poem, Making Things refers to the act of creating. And in that poem also, I pay a debt, or at least acknowledge my grandmother, who kind of instilled, maybe against the tide of the cultural and social forces of this country, a sense of self-worth, that my art can do more than just reflect back, kind of what I was saying in that essay, be a testament of my existence, but maybe inspiring others to also feel their own selfhood. Thanks for that question.
Do you
Yeah.
remember the last line of that poem?
Yes, I think the last line of that poem, let's see, my grandmother who never raised a ghost, but but a storm. But a storm. Say it again. So look at me. Hold on. I know this. So look at me. Almost it has something to do with standing in something threatening to become a raging river.
Yeah,
on the porch laughing at the creek, threatening to become a raging river.
really terrific.
Thank you so much. I would love it if you read it at some point.
I was hoping you could both talk a little bit about the thoughts and considerations that go into assembling a collection. Because that's a very different type of thinking and process for an artist, right? Is to figure out what conversation you want them to have and what gets included and what doesn't. And so I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts and experiences from that?
Yeah. I'll start, but I'm really also really curious about Major's answer with the new and selected. I'm really fascinated by that whole process. For the most recent, the second collection, Field Guide, that one kind of naturally emerged when I started following my impulses, patterns that I was noticing in the writing. And I discovered threads emerging in the poems. And it sort of it made it pretty easy to figure out which poems belonged in the collection once I kind of noticed relationships between the poems. So I guess really what it was just kind of taking a step back and seeing what is this mess that I have in front of me? What's the thing that ties it all together, or strongest connects these, and which ones don't belong right now in this collection because they just aren't really connected to this selection of poems. Yeah, I guess that's really it.
I had to, my aunt was a security guard at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and she would let me and my cousins in for free during the summer, hot days. And I grew up in that museum, and the experience of walking through a museum has been how I've thought about putting together a collection. The great thing about our new and selected is that it really is an equivalent of a retrospective. In that regard, there is the kind of the sweep of an artist's themes and works, often done chronologically. In this particular case, I started with a newer work and then went back to the first book. And move chronologically through the new and selected. Recently, I was talking to someone about, or an audience like this, about when you read your older work or even work for new and selected, you're getting into almost the DNA of your existence. And so for me, you know how there's those retrospective and it's the full sweep of an artist's work. And then you go into that dark room where they got a film going, right? That was, I realized some of my poems felt like going into a dark room and this big screen is flashing. And so those poems I kind of pulled out. I wanted to just stick with what I felt was essential. You pull that down to scale to a single volume, and it really does become a question of how do the themes play off each other, or how does the aesthetic construction of a poem start to kind of expand and accumulate what's come before. We live in an age of books as projects, and I'm looking forward to us returning and valuing collections of poems just for the single poem itself. Right now, we think about an arc of a book and the conversations that you were talking about. But if each poem can stand on its own, I think that's a very successful book.
For